Hiya. um, this video may be a little bit different to others on the channel insofar as a lot of these videos will be pitched at people, at certain levels of users or people who are at certain stages of a research project. The difference between setting up your project and between running analysis, visualizations, that kind of thing. This one probably could be of interest to anyone along any stage of the journey because it's one that comes up a lot. It's a kind of question that comes up a lot in training workshops and in post training support and on our forums. Is that whole process of managing codes through codes, categories, and themes, which almost all methods but have. Um, and really, a lot of the training we do is as much about applying a recognized data analysis method to your data in NVivo as it is about using the tool itself. Because most of the people who we train are somehow involved in academia, research, publishing, writing reports. So kind of principles of research apply as much as the tool itself is useful for applying them. The one I want to talk to you about today is managing those three processes. Codes, categories, and themes, which almost all methods have. The file we're using today is the standard tutorial that comes shipped with NVivo. You'll have a copy of this if you've had NVivo. It's been modified in this instance just to apply reflexive thematic analysis, which is a widely used method, for a different video that we were showing how you apply RTA in NVivo, another one on IPA. And you can download a copy of this modified file if you want. We'll put the link below. But in the comments, or in the description, should I say. So this one is modified for the 6 stages of Brown and Clark reflexive thematic analysis. It's not about the method, it's about the process. This is version 14, by the way. It will look very similar for Windows and Mac, and we'll put a Windows and Mac version up there for you. And what we're about to talk about today is essentially exactly the same in both operating systems, both in principle and in terms of mechanics. But if you have an older version of NVivo, you won't be able to open this file. It has to be 14 or higher. So this is modified for RTA, and the three processes. I mean, the first thing, I suppose, in terms of applying a recognized data analysis method in the first place, is that a lot of researchers discover, when they go looking, and if you're going to publish, or if you're in any kind of an academic setting, you are expected to apply a recognized data analysis method to your data. And the first thing you discover when you go looking is that there's a lot of them. Discourse analysis, content analysis, grounded theory, 3 different schools, phenomenology, 10 different schools, template analysis, framework analysis, thematic analysis, reflexive thematic analysis. The list just goes on. The second thing that you discover is that every academic who writes a book wants to sell it. Pardon my cynicism. And they tend to reinvent vocabulary. You get a lot of these interchangeable terms. So one person's axial coding is another person's developing core categories, when actually the process is the same. So you could strip all of these methods, no matter what you're calling them or which one you're applying, to 3 processes that everybody does in every qualitative study. Now, the first one is coding data. The second one is managing codes through iterations or cycles of coding. The third one is documenting your coding. And the video on RTA and IPA both deal comprehensively with documenting your coding. So the process I want to talk about first is coding. I'm not making any assumptions about our audience today. Some of you may have coded, some of you may not have. So when I talk about coding, I'm talking about recognizing a unit of meaning in a piece of text or a segment of media, and recognizing that segment of text represents a meaning, regardless of the words that the person used. And you would create a code. This is just phase 2, systematic data coding of Brown and Clark. But this could be applied to any method. You would create a code. I can just make a new code here. I can call it test. This one happens to be about community change, the two examples I'm using here, which is in your tutorial. Just to show you the process, I can make a new code. It will appear in my list here. I highlight a piece of text which represents the unit of meaning. Now it could be these two units here that are highlighted represent actually community change. Well, I'm just going to do the test code just to show you how it works. So if I were coding this, I'd recognize, well, this is really about community change, and I would drag it to the community change code. Or I would right click, if I don't like drag and drop, and do code selection at this. And in fact, if I may want to put this into several codes. I'm just holding my control key so you can see that I can put this into several codes at the same time, because another question that comes up sometimes is, can the same piece of text go to more than one code? And absolutely. You can have a piece of text that has several units of meaning embedded within it. So I can drag and drop, or I can code it. If I just do this with the test one we just made, I just highlight the text, drag it in, you'll see it now shows that I have one reference, one text segment, one unit of meaning from one file, one interview. I can manage codes and I can delete codes and do all of that as well. So that's coding, and it's a labor-intensive, time-consuming process. I had a student say to me in a nursing group in a university recently, in a master's group, America said, I don't want to do SPSS. I told her she was taking a tougher road with coding, with qualitative, because it is a very labor-intensive, time-consuming process, and there is no magic bullet. It's interpretive coding. So AI can do descriptive coding, but not interpretive coding. So most of these methods would have you pass to 3 cycles of coding. The initial coding tends to be descriptive. This is where they talk about community change, so I'm putting it in the community change bucket. I haven't done any analysis of that yet. All I've done is a good collation job on my data. Instead of having, 62 comments spread across 18 interviews that talk about community change, I now have a document that contains everything people said about community change, because a code behaves both like a document and a folder. It's a document in that it can contain all the references to something. If I just open up community change, you'll see it there. There's all the comments about community change, and there's the different interviews that have informed it. These tabs on the side give me different views of it, and this little link above each of them tells me where it's coming from. So I can see here also in the summary tab all the different mentions of community change in all the different interviews and how much it came up or how little it came up in these interviews. Codes behave like documents, but they also behave like folders. I could drag water quality and drop it under tourism, and it would go in there as a subcode. So codes can not only behave like documents, they can behave like folders, which in the way that a code can contain another code, in the way that a folder can contain another folder. Therefore, I can put a structure on what was previously unstructured. Well, that's coding, and everything you've heard about AI up to now. In terms of descriptive coding, yes, you can do descriptive coding with AI tools, but interpretive coding, no, because AI tools don't have your life experience, your knowledge of the world under scrutiny, the language, the culture, the nuanced things. It didn't do your lit review. There's so many aspects of coding and interpretive coding that requires input from a human, an experienced researcher who not only understands the process of coding, but as I said, the world under scrutiny. So that's coding. You'll do bucket loads of it in any qualitative study. It isn't rocket science. We can teach you the processes in NVivo very quickly. There isn't really any difference, by the way, in coding in NVivo or coding outside. If I were doing this manually, I'd highlight those comments Barbara's comments with perhaps color-coded pens, or I might draw a bracket in the margin and write the word, community change in the margin. I might have different color pens for different themes or concepts. That process isn't really any faster in NVivo. It's the thinking that slows you down. It's not the act of coding. It's in the retrieval and reporting of those codes that you get the benefit of having a database. So that's coding. Now, the second process that everybody does is managing codes through cycles or iterations of coding. The initial coding tends to be descriptive in nature. As I said, this is where they talk about community change, so it goes into that bucket. The secondary coding is where I start to use my own knowledge and experience, both as a human being and as a professional, and I start to interpret the data. So you ask me in an interview if I take risks, and I say, no, I never take risks. Later on, maybe when I'm answering an entirely different question, I go on to describe perfectly risky behavior that I don't perceive as risky. But you're the expert on risk. You read the literature. So you code me there, and I may not fully get why I'm being coded. The final coding is researcher-led. You've now moved away completely from the participant, and you're engaging the data at a much higher intellectual and analytical plane. You're now engaging with theory, concepts, policy. You're in a much wider arena. So typically you're going from the descriptive to the interpretive to the abstract, sometimes referred to in literature as codes, categories, themes. Participant-led, partnership, researcher-led. So the second process, having looked at coding, is managing those codes. So I'll just take water quality out of there just to have, because typically early coding, typically non-hierarchical. I'm just deconstructing the data. But now I want to start, and this is an exploratory stage. I'm probably not thinking about the research questions at this point. I'm thinking about the data. This is very much a data-led process. But then as I move through to managing codes, I start to think about the research questions and the aims. So we have 19 codes developed in the tutorial here from the interviews. This is the environmental changes down east study that comes shipped with NVivo. Now we've reduced that to 9 categories of codes. So codes, categories, themes. They're described in different ways. Brown and Clark, the authors of Reflexive Thematic Analysis, describe this process as generating initial themes. So I'm seeing some of my open codes, my phase 2 systematic data coding, and I'm seeing all of these sit under a broader category. They're all about the natural environment. Some of them are non-hierarchical, but they're still a category in that infrastructure is big enough to be a category as well as a code. And here's all the different codes that reflect the economy or go under the category of economy. Now, that process of creating categories and moving them down is a simple one. You would be thinking through here and thinking about the aims of the study, but if I just want to make a new category here, I'll just call it category. I'm going to do something different though. I'm going to aggregate this and I'm going to apply a color to it to remind myself I don't want to put text in here. I want to put other codes in, like a folder. This is a heading, like the economy. Then I go back to my open codes and I find all of the codes. I'm just going to hold my control key and randomly select a few codes here. Let's say these are the codes that sit under that category. So I copy them. I don't want to cut them. I don't want to move them in this folder because I don't want to destroy my history. We have a whole other video on audit trails if you want to take a look at that and the importance of them. I'll put the link again below. But I'm going to copy those and I'm going to go into category 1 and I'm going to paste. You see that category 1 now is fully populated with data. There's 179 comments in there. All of the codes, not only that, I can compare category 1 to other categories to see where the data is. Where's the data leading me? Some categories will draw a lot more content from the interviews than others, meaning it's been cited more often across more interviews. It's not that we're interested in the absolute number, it's the relative number. So they talk about the economy quite extensively. They don't talk about infrastructure in quite the same to quite the same extent, or policy. So I can compare categories because that aggregation means that the content has been sucked up into the parent as well. And I have an analysis of the elements that are informing that category from my systematic phase 2 coding. So that's the second stage of managing codes and developing categories from codes. Then I have to think about developing themes. Now, in this particular method, there's a review in between, and then you get to the point where you're making themes. The themes will look different. Having gone through this process of 9 categories, we have reduced them. Now, there's a full hour video on this, but that's not quite an hour, but it's there if you want it on this process. But we have identified 4, defined and named 4 themes, very broad areas that are under scrutiny. Sometimes people struggle with the idea of the difference between a code and a theme. I mean, Brown and Clark write about this. They give an example of the difference between, like, they have a descriptive code where women describe dieting and losing weight. And that's a descriptive code, and that's what you'd see in those comments if you looked in. However, when the research was reading through those codes, and this is what I mean about this third stage, these meanings, these themes are often latent in the data. They're not obvious until you read the data several times. But what the researcher noticed among those comments about weight loss was an underlying assumption by the women that weight loss was always good, that all women want to lose weight. That's the theme, and the code would sit under that. And by the way, just this particular method, once you develop a theme, you've got to start thinking what you're going to report on. You've got to start thinking about your discussion. So themes should be wrapped around a central concept. So weight loss is always good might sit under a higher level code again, a theme that, idealization of weight as a social construct, which will be taking that back to literature and theory now. So the process is moving these around, and you're deciding which is a code, which is a category, and which is a theme, and you're creating them. So there isn't a prescribed path to NVivo. You can apply any method in NVivo. And they're even numbered in the sequence that these are going to be presented as the themes. So we'll talk about community before we talk about development. Then that'll lead us into a discussion on the economy and all of that, and how it impacts and how the tensions between all of that and the natural environment. And there will be sub-themes in some cases. So under community, there was a sense of community. And they talked a lot about changes in the community. Under the natural environment, there are the issues that comes up: water quality, habitat, environmental changes, etc. So again, you're now mapping your categories in the way we did with the codes to categories. We're now mapping our categories to our broader themes. And that gives us a final thematic framework. Again, it's a copy and paste. You develop your themes from your knowledge of the data, and then you map the codes in. So it's a short video in the sense that we're not going into a lot of technical stuff on this because it isn't really technical, but we get a surprising number of questions about this. So I'd like to have a video at least to refer our own clients to, where we explain how you would manage codes, categories, and themes in NVivo, and I hope we've done that. So if you thought that was useful, please like and subscribe to the channel, and otherwise I'll see you on the next video.